The lore teaches. Mountains with infamous names. In a region of Upper Carinthia, not far from the Drava river, there is a mountain called Hochstaff, High Court. The peak of this mountain dominates the Drava valley, from nearly the border of Tyrol to Klagenfurt, i.e. to the vicinity of the city. At the same time, the so-called Weisse See, White Lake, borders it at its foot to the southwest. With a height of 8,000 feet, anyone who has climbed this mountain will certainly enjoy the most enchanting view from its summit. This mountain was once extremely notorious, for it was, so to speak, a primary gathering place for witches and their masters. According to the legend of the country folk still living today, of course, those inhabiting the land surrounding the mountain. Its foothills were given their current names due to its former magical fame. One of the foothills to the north is called Goldeck, Golden Peak. One to the northwest is known as Siflitz. One to the west bears the name Bärenbuck, Bareback. One to the south is called Silberne Grab, Silver Grave. The vertical rock of the highest peak is called the Hohe Freiung, High Clearing, and a wall slightly below it, the Unterfreiung, Low Clearing. Just as the col between the High Court and Lower Court is occasionally called the Hexenritt, Witch's Ride, or sometimes the Teufelsritt, Devil's Ride. In front of this col, there is a bare stone ditch called the Rutschbrett des Teufels, Devil's Sliding Board. Another ditch which slopes towards the west is called the Wilde Jagd, an area where wild animals are hunted. These names, and several others just like them, such as Hexensprung, Witch Jump, Devil's Ride, Werwolf's Nest, Werewolf Nest, and many more, sufficiently describe the reputation this mountain once enjoyed. Yet apart from all these side names, the name Staff, Court, alone is enough to understand that this was once a major magic mountain. The word Staff was an expression used by these past mountain dwellers to describe the quality of an extraordinary thing. Extraordinary, however, was that which served as a point of reference for the elements, such as air and water with all their phenomena, as well as for humans and animals, which is why in later times a new name was given to this mountain, one that merely translated the initial name into a more modern German. The new name was, and still is, Landschnur, from which the French who lived there later created Landjour. Thus the word Staff in this old mountain language denotes a kind of court, and Hochstaff a high court. And this is because every unauthorized individual not initiated into the magic mysteries of this mountain was immediately most terribly judged, of course by the wizards, if anyone dared to climb this mountain to where the forested region ends. Such guests were suddenly seized by invisible hands, and, in a flash, carried away to the highest peak, as the legend goes. There he was tortured by equally invisible forces for several hours in a most painful and cruel manner, forced with a voice of thunder to join the witches' coven. If he refused, he was thrown from the highest point, which was therefore called the High Clearing, to the Low Clearing, though in a magical manner that he would not die from the fall. Thereafter, the most enchanting sylphs came upon him and intoxicated him with the charm of their form. If he surrendered to them, he was suddenly lifted back up to the High Court and initiated into their mysteries. If, however, he refused to be intoxicated by the sylph's charms, he was placed on the Devil's Sliding Board, having to make the terrible journey back down into the valley, during which, of course, as they say, all his limbs were completely lost. Yet if he was but a bit willing in response to the sylph's stimuli, he was placed upon the golden peak, where he was dazzled by the enormous masses of the bright gold present. And if that was not enough, he was led southwards to the area of the Silver Grave. This was not actually a grave, but a most beautiful, fairy-like area of the mountain, so enchanting to this newcomer that he could no longer avoid joining the witch's coven completely. Of course, all of these are mere folk tales, mostly of the people who lived in the lowest region of the valley. The wiser mountain dwellers, who not seldom had to endure a shameful judgment by the stupidity of the lower valley dwellers, knew nothing of all the witchcraft, but they did know of the spirits that inhabited this mountain all over, as abundantly as rarely any other mountain. But why this mountain in particular? The reason for why these beings take increased possession of any one mountain over another is always different. In part, it depends on the location, as well as a certain height, or even the contents, but mostly on a certain position, one in which the mountain is cut off from all the other ones surrounding it, so that the spirits dwelling upon the other mountains, commonly of an evil nature, cannot easily reach these spirits and cause disorder among them. Primarily, however, mountains such as this are occupied by the above-mentioned spirits because they offer a delightful view of all the surrounding regions, owing to its unconfined position. For all these spirits possess the ability, if they so choose, to behold the natural world. And because they are also used for weather-making, as it is called, they must keep a constant watchful eye on the neighboring mountain spirits. That is why such mountains are dearest to these spirits, for there is nothing to restrict their observations. Of course, these spirits are accompanied by more perfected spirits, who command and guide them. But nevertheless, no spirit is deprived of its individual freedom and the bliss associated with it. And thus is this one of the most famous mountains in this country. Another of its luminaries is the Unholde, fiends or monsters, an even more notorious example than the High Court. For the names attributed to this mountain even today, as well as its almost mystical, wildly romantic and grotesque design, are more than telling evidence of its former magical fame. We will mention but a few of the names its foothills and its premises bear, sufficient to instruct us as to what this mountain was once supposed to look like, but never truly did, of course. The highest peak of this mountain is called the Hohe Staff, i.e. an elevated dwelling place where the witches spent their winter and summer. A side peak of this mountain is also called the Low Clearing, and another peak rising above it is called the High Clearing. A clearing, in this case, is a place where innocent people were recruited as wizards in the manner described earlier. Just below these two clearings is a fairly extensive square, where the new arrivals had to learn to work magic. To this day, this square is called the Zauberrad, Magic Wheel, or the Zauberplatz, Magic Square. Above this magic square, to the south, there was another rocky outcrop called Rudnick. This was where the new students of magic relaxed. Below the Rudnick, even further south, there was a large open space called Gelice. Gelice, a word in the foolish magic language of the time, means as much as a place of the most exuberant joy, as well as a place of magic plays. Several springs were located at the rock faces of the Hohe Staff, emitting a jet of water at exactly 11:30 o'clock, of which only one has survived to this day, called Halb 12 Uhr Bründel, 11:30 o'clock fountain. Even further south rises the so-called Hohe Trut, whose name, in regard to its former significance, should not be described in any more detail. Above this Hohe Trut is the so-called Rote Wand, Red Wall, also known as the Blutwand, Blood Wall, which apostates or traitors to witchcraft are said to have been hurled against by the devils. Even above this elevated red wall lies the so-called Drei Hexenspitze, Peak of the Three Witches, or Drei Hexenköpfe in today's vernacular, which was continually inhabited by three of the most wicked witches, keeping watch from those lofty heights. Even above this Peak of the Three Witches rises a rather steep ridge up to the Hohe Stadel, going by the name of Hexenstieg, Witch's Climb, which, as already mentioned, stretches all the way up to the highest peak, whereupon the Stadel, or castle of the Witch King, was located. To the north, parallel to the highest peak, runs a rocky ridge 10 fathoms long and 3 fathoms wide. This formation now bears the name Hohe Brüstung, but it used to be called Hexentrui. Trui means something like drive. They were driven out into the open air to grasp the fog that rose from the peak known as Deuwand, translated into modern context as Teufelswand, Devil's Wall. To the north of the Deuwand lies the Dreispitze, Devil's Trident. Further to the north is the Böse Sieg, Evil Victory. And a little further north still is the Hohe Siebenwand, also called the Hohle Spitze, Hollow Peak, which is said to have been inhabited by the very worst of spirits. More to the south of the Hohe Stadel lies an incredibly steep peak known as the Verdammte Bucht, Damned Bay. In more recent times known as the Sandris, Sand Tear. Even further south, but a little lower, is the Teufelsgalgen, Devil's Gallows. And from there, a little further southwest, is the Böse Weib, Wicked Woman. From these names, it becomes quite clear how famous this mountain range once was. The name Fiends alone suffices to show the once well-known character it possessed, having dominated part of Carinthia, Tyrol, and a large section of Romandy. However, it goes without saying that there is nothing to these legends other than what I have already explained all too clearly. This Hochstadel is an exposed mountain as well, and as such a preferred abode of the nature spirits, who have already made themselves known to you. These were already in known conflict or contact with the country folk living at the foot of the mountain. However, the fact that the names of this mountain and its foothills is linked to many a saddening story of witch inquisition hardly needs to be elaborated on in more detail. For the witch trial site of the old domain of Flaschberg can be seen at the Drava River even today, whose name all but sufficiently describes what was once perpetrated here. There are many more mountains like this in Tyrol. The Ganzspitze, the Hohe Böse Ring, the Böse Stein, the Hohe Helm, the Brenner, the Ötzer, the Vinschgauer Hochkuppe, the Wurmsrioch, and many others are extremely notorious. In Switzerland, there are the famous Wetterhorn, the Finstere Achhorn, the Hohe Mönch, the Wöllerhorn, the Pilatusspitze, the Bernhardsberg, the Teufelsbrücke, and many others of a similar caliber. Yet the mountains of Savoy are infamous to the highest degree. According to popular legend, they are home to the highest-ranking members of evil spirits. And not so long ago, every Savoyard was regarded with such contempt that he was hardly considered more elevated than an animal. Just as not so long ago, the inhabitants of the Pyrenees, named the Jacots, were despised by the Spaniards even more than the most vile dog. Now that, with these little histories, we have sufficiently explained the existence of the spirits in this second region, and have seen how things work around here, we shall descend at once to the first region and see how things are down there, spiritually